Could the Pelicans use different starting lineups on a game-to-game basis? How the Pels plan to rebound this year? And we have NBA Cup dates announced. It's the Thursday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcast and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Thursday, and we are answering some of your questions in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. It's the off season. Tweet me your questions. Put them in the comments down below. I got two really good ones here that I think lead to more interesting discussions around the team. So we're going to discuss different starting lineups on a game-to-game basis based on the opponent. Small ball, not small ball. Could you do that? Then I want to look at the Pelicans rebounding and how they're going to do that this year. And I don't know if it's going to be as big of an issue as some might think. Then we'll get into the NBA Cup dates announced here. I'm a big fan of the in-season tournament rebranded the NBA Cup. It's in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Yeah, there's not a ton of sports going on, but there's MLB, and you can get on NBA future games now that they're being announced. So this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's get into this question. And I don't have them in front of me, so I'm sorry for not shouting people out, but let's get to the question here. If it's you, let me know in the comments down below on YouTube here. Could the Pelicans use different starting lineups on a game-to-game basis? So maybe one game you start Daniel Tice at center. Maybe another game you go with small ball. Zion at the 5. Put Trey Murphy, who maybe is coming off the bench, into the starting lineup there. Maybe you need more rim protection in a certain game because of a guy like Zach Edey or someone with the Memphis Grizzlies. So do you start Yves Missi? Could you rotate pieces around? Maybe you know you're going up against a bad offensive team with a good defense. So do you bench Herb Jones, put CJ McCollum in? So the long and short of this is no, absolutely not. Under no circumstances will you do something like this, nor should you, right? You shouldn't, and they won't. So it kind of cuts this down, but I think it's interesting to look at because I get what the essence, I think, of this question is, right? Like when do you play small ball? Right? It's not should you start small ball one game and not the next. It's when do you play small ball is the essence of that question. You know, how do you tailor your game plan to your opponent and things like that? When do you make adjustments? That's the essence of this question. So, you know, you pick a starting lineup and you might not ride with that all season long, but you're going to try that group out for a period of time. One, you need to see how they do together over a couple of games. And you don't like to just make changes just to make changes. You know, we talked about this in yesterday's show when we were looking at head coach Willie Green. You know, one of his jobs this year, one of every coach's jobs is identify what the strengths of your team are. Identify what the strengths of your team are and maximize those. Play to those. Put that group that plays to your strengths on the court as much as possible. You know, I often get asked, and it ties to this question, you know, like what's a game plan look like on a game-to-game basis? You during the regular season when you have 82 games and something like only like 20 to 30 practice days, right? Like you'd be shocked at how little they go through a true practice to install new things, do different things. It's usually just like a quick walk around and shoot around and that's about it. Then you go play a basketball game. You know, when you figure out what your team does and you just try and emphasize that. Are you a team that kills it on the offensive glass? Cool. You're going to do that every game regardless of who the opponent is. So think of it like, you know, the Super Bowl or just a regular NFL game where you often script the first 10, 15, 20, 25 plays, offensive plays that you have, and you're going to run those for the most part no matter what because you know what the strengths of your team are. You know, if you're a good running team and the opponent has a good run defense, it's not like we're going to pass every down and we're never going to run. No, you're going to have your strength beat their strength because you believe in it. And that's what NBA teams do as well. They know what they're good at. They know what their general game plan is. They know, like, hey, this is how we win games based on our roster and the collection of talent and the skills that they possess. So we're going to design an offense around that. We're going to design a defense around that too. And we're going to stick with that. And the more you change that from game to game, your game plan's got to change. That confuses players. You lack an identity, I think, when that's the case. So just based off that alone, you don't do that. I think you would be shocked at how little for every NBA team gets changed on like a game-by-game basis, where it's like you don't really see wholesale changes all the time. Every now and then, yeah. But not always do you see it on a game-to-game basis, regardless if the opponent is very, very different or not. So that means no to this question. But let's get into the small ball question, right? When can you go with Zion at the 5? And everyone, when you say small ball, thinks of the Golden State Warriors. Their kind of original run there when they had what was known as the death lineup, right? That's what coined that phrase. And it was basically you put Draymond Green, not a center, at the 5 spot, at the center position, because he's so good defensively that he could guard those, but it allowed him to just play small, fast, and with a lot of movement and shooting on offense. That worked for them. It worked for them because they had an elite collection of players. And while I do think there is a strong collection of players here in terms of talent, you don't have the linchpin to make that work, which was Draymond Green in his defense. Zion isn't Draymond Green defensively. Herb Jones isn't even Draymond Green defensively like that, where you think he can guard 5s. And if you don't have someone that can guard 5s, yes, you can play small ball, right? And you force teams to adjust to you, but you give up things with that too. And we're going to get into rebounding in the next segment here because it's important to keep in mind with this too. No one realizes, and it's not talked about because we focused on the offense of that death lineup and Draymond guarding 5s. They were a garbage defensive rebounding team. They were small, right? Like they weren't a good defensive rebounding unit. That was a big weakness of that. And they overcame that by making shots, being able to get back at set and then kind of get some steals and things like that with that unit. But when opponents missed, they were able to crash the glass and they could hurt that death lineup, the small ball lineup, big time. So keep that in mind, that if you're like, maybe the Pelicans can play small, usually playing small means you're going to give up offensive boards. So your offense better be real good, and the defense better be real good in every other aspect other than basically rim protection and offensive rebounding to overcome that. And I'm not sure if the Pelicans will. So, while yes, they will play small with Zion at the 5 and do that, throughout games, I don't think you'll see it run the majority of the game necessarily because they are concerned about the offensive glass for the opponents. Right? It's their defensive glass and that sort of thing. So that's worth keeping in mind, right? It's when do you deploy that? And I think there are going to be strategic times to do that, but I don't think it's going to necessarily be as much as we're maybe thinking it will be to start the year because of the rebounding being an issue with those small ball lineup things. So no, I don't really think they're going to change things too much. I think they're going to pick, a starting center, and my guess right now is Daniel Tice, and then they'll figure out the rest. But, people are going to have to find roles. That's important. You can't start CJ one game, bench him next because you need more shooting or whatever it might be. People kind of need to know their roles. They need to prep for their roles too. And that's why, we talked about this in yesterday's show for the everydayers. You see a rotation kind of get set and they stick with that no matter what, right? There's some adjustments here and there, but by and large, that's not what NBA teams, Willie Green or anybody, right, really do. And maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, who knows? But clearly they're doing it this way for a reason, so there must be something to it. So we just talked a little bit about the rebounding and the issues it could be for New Orleans. How are they going to rebound this year with without Jonas Valanciunas and Larry Nance Jr. gone? Is that a problem? Is there something we should be concerned about? I'm not really worried about it, and I have data and reasons to give you why maybe you shouldn't either. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. It's the summer. Things are slowing down, but we still got Major League Baseball right now. You want to get in on the action for who's going to hit a home run? You can do it over at FanDuel. And FanDuel is going to just let you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. It doesn't necessarily need to be a sport that's happening now. They got the opening night NBA lines available. I actually really like the New York Knicks plus 5.5 at the ring ceremony over the Boston Celtics where they get thrown off because things take longer. There's a lot of emotions running high. You see a lot of upsets on ring night. Maybe that's something the New York Knicks can do. Plus 5.5, you can get that line right now over at FanDuel. So this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the official sports betting partner of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday in the Number One Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. And now for your second listen, Locked On NBA. No one keeps you as entertained or provides you the analysis you want as the Locked On NBA podcast does, 30 minutes or less. I'm on there every Wednesday breaking down the biggest stories around the association. There's no off season for the NBA, and Locked On NBA has you covered every single day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, especially listed on Wednesdays when I'm on there. Come on now. So let's get into this question. This was, how are the Pelicans going to rebound this year? They lost Jonas Valanciunas. He was a good rebounder. He was defensive rebounder. What are they going to do to be kind of, I guess, competitive, I guess is the question, in that area and stop that from being a weakness? Identify your strengths, your weaknesses. Jonas Valanciunas was by far the best defensive rebounder for the Pelicans last season. When he was on the court, he grabbed over 30% of all available defensive rebounds. That's a really, really good number. The next closest player that played significant minutes was Cody Zeller at 22%. Larry Nance Jr. was at 19.3% of players still on the team. Jeremiah Robinson Earl was 17.5%. Trey Murphy was 15.5%, though that rose as the season went on. Brandon Ingram, 14.5%. Zion, 14.2%. CJ, 12.6%. Dyson Daniels was 14.1%. Jordan Hawkins was 11.3%. We'll say Jose Alvarado here because was 11, and then Herb Jones kind of low on this in a surprising way, 9.4%. But the Pelicans were a decent defensive rebounding team last year. They were in fact good. They ranked sixth best in terms of defensive rebounding percentage. They grabbed essentially 77% of all available defensive boards, so 23% went to the opponent. But let's dive into this a little bit deeper because I think a lot of people assume the natural thing, which is, well, that was Jonas Valanciunas doing the carrying of all of this and kind of making up for everybody else. And now that he's not on the team, what are they going to do? And I think there's a little bit of a misconception here. While, yes, Jonas was an elite defensive rebounder, and he is, some lineups with him out there weren't elite at it, and that's okay, right? One of the things you've got to think about, and I know you're going to point to games they lost where they gave up offensive rebound after offensive rebound. But you've got to look at it over an 82 games schedule, and you can't overreact for 1-2 games because, look, the numbers say they weren't bad in that regard. Now, they struggled in the fourth quarter in clutch situations. I'll give you that. But overall, when they could avoid those situations, they were doing okay. When Jonas Valanciunas was on the floor, the Pelicans were ranked in the 90th percentile in terms of defensive rebounding percentage. That was really good. But with the starting lineup, the lineup that played the most minutes, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, Jonas Valanciunas, was only in the 62nd percentile. It drops, right? Now, the numbers are close, so you kind of are splitting hairs a little bit here. But that group was overall kind of good, and we felt it could be better, and they weren't an elite rebounding unit, and it was okay for the most part. The real thing I think we want to look at right now, though, is their defensive rebounding percentage as a team when you had Larry Nance Jr. on the court. Now, he didn't really play with Jonas Valanciunas at all because, for reasons, but that's neither here nor there. It was, I think we want to look at the Larry Nance Jr. rebounding, and did they do an okay job when he was on the court? Were they winning their minutes when he was on the court? Because that's close to the type of player that they have right now. Daniel Tice is 6'8", so he's somewhat of like a small ball five, even though he isn't really, and that's the guy that we think, at least right now, is going to play the majority of those center minutes, over Karlo Makovic and over Yves Missi, neither of whom have played in the NBA yet. So how did the team do? And here's the thing with it, right? They had a pretty poor defensive rebounding percentage overall when Larry Nance Jr. was on the court. It didn't really work too well. It was in the 44th percentile. That's not great. They were giving up about 70. I'm going to do the math here to figure it all out for you, but we'll do the math here. Their defensive rebounding percentage when he was on the court was 73%. So below the team's average for the season, which is at 77%. Puts them in the 44th percentile here. So not a good number. You're below average at that point in time. But here's the thing with that, right? And this is where stats get interesting. The minutes that he played, looking at the averages, they were a plus 2.3. So net rating, offensive rating minus defensive rating, that's what we use to kind of judge the efficiency of a unit of a lineup. It was positive. Basically, that says is they won their minutes. They won their minutes, which is your ultimate goal. Not by a ton, but they won their minutes. And outside of the starters with Larry, CJ, Ingram, Herb Jones, Zion, Larry, which was a -5, the next three most used lineups for him were a heavy positive. The next one was plus 15.3, plus 30, plus 32. So they were winning their minutes with him on the court, despite rebounding not being great, but even the second most used lineup with him got that defensive rebounding percentage way up. CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, Larry Nance Jr. was in the 78th percentile when it came to defensive rebounding percentage. I don't know, that says there's something that can work there, right? There is definitely something to it where if you're able to kind of have that, not be an elite number, let's say, but be good enough and you win your minutes, that's an important thing. It was 78.8% in that lineup, and that was a plus 15.3. That's a good lineup, right? You can run something similar to that this year with Daniel Tice there instead of Larry Nance Jr., and it's not going to maybe be the end of the world. So I think they'll be okay when it comes to rebounding, no matter what, whether it's Daniel Tice, whether it's somewhat as a small ball. But Zion's not Larry Nance Jr. when it comes to rebounding. He's not some of those other guys too. So that is worth keeping in mind that those small ball lineups probably aren't going to be great. But the lineups with Daniel Tice or one of the other centers is probably going to be all right. Daniel Tice last year had a 17.2% defensive rebounding percentage. For his career, it's 18.5. Now, it's gone down the past couple of years a little bit from it's like peak before, but those aren't bad numbers by any stretch. The other thing that I think, they can look at doing is just team rebounding a little bit more, right? One of the reasons those lineups did okay with Larry Nance Jr. is because everyone was trying to rebound just a little bit more. That doesn't mean, there's a trade-off to that. You can't get out and run in transition as much. But here's the thing. Think about it. With DeJounte Murray in the fold, and in theory, the offense being a little bit more organized and better, maybe you don't need to get those easy buckets in transition. You want those, obviously, if you can get them, right? But you have to sacrifice if you're going for defensive rebounds, you can't leak out in transition and try and get a full head of steam and run out and beat opponents. You're going to let them get back, get set as you commit to getting that board. So if this team feels there's enough offense in the half court, which was the struggle for him last year because of DeJounte Murray, if you listen to yesterday's show, because you're an everydayer, maybe because Brandon Ingram is buying into what Willie Green is selling a little bit more, and their half court offense is going to be better, you can commit more people to grabbing defensive boards, right? It's a trade-off, and if you improve in one area, it means you can maybe improve in another area, and it's kind of balancing it out like that and elevating you as a squad overall. So I do think regardless, I think they're going to be okay. And while I don't think they'll be as good as they were last year, that's going to certainly drop. I think it can be all right with some of these units, maybe not elite, but if they make up for it in offense other ways or other areas, that trade-off is well worth it, in my opinion. So I think rebounding will be okay, but you can also just commit to kind of team rebounding a little bit more. And maybe Trey Murphy, as he improved during the season, is able to take a leap rebounding as well. That would go a long way towards letting you play certain combinations and not being worried about that as a weakness of the squad. So coming up next, the NBA Cup dates are out, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a huge NBA Cup fan. But wait, do you know what the NBA Cup is? I'll explain in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. For your second listen today, Locked On Saints. Ross Jackson making sense of everything black and gold over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The NBA Cup dates are announced. We're getting little bits of the schedule being leaked, and now we've got 4 games to tell you about. But what's the NBA Cup? It's the in-season tournament from last year that's just been rebranded a little bit here. It's now the Emirates NBA Cup. So the way it works is it's done by conference, and each conference is separated into 3 groups of 5 teams. The Pelicans are in Group C with Denver, Dallas, New Orleans, Golden State, and Memphis. So they're all going to play each other one time, and you then advance. Remember, the Pelicans went on a nice little run during that and ended up making it to the semifinals, is what it was, losing to the Lakers, who then went on to beat the Indiana Pacers, there we go, and won the inaugural in-season tournament. These are the games when they have the weird court on the floor, and these games are just regular season games. They count towards the regular standings, but they also just have a little bit of lagniappe, if you will, attached to them. And I love it. I love how garish all of the courts are. I love that these games just feel a little bit different. This is a lot of fun to me. I actually really enjoy it. More importantly to me, the players take it seriously. They want the extra money. They just want to win things. And look, say the Pelicans don't make the playoffs but won the in-season tournament, the NBA Cup, we'd love a banner. We'd celebrate that. We'd wear the T-shirts here. If New Orleans ever truly won Summer League, we'd print the shirts. We'd have all of that. So it's going to be a lot of fun to try and win this and be competitive in it because the Pelicans had a good run during this. They had that blowout loss to the Lakers that served as a big wake-up call for Zion Williamson too. And maybe that was a good thing. So the games are as follows for the New Orleans Pelicans. On Friday, November 15th, they play at home versus Denver. The next Tuesday, November 19th, they're on the road at Dallas. The Friday after that, 11/22, they're home versus Golden State, and then they wrap up the group play in their bracket here on November 29th. It's a Black Friday game, the day after Thanksgiving, at Memphis on the road. That's an early game at 4 p.m. Central, and it is on NBA TV, so a nationally televised game. It's a tough group. The other groups here are Minnesota, the Clippers, Sacramento, Houston, and Portland in Group A. I prefer that one. And in Group B, you have Oklahoma City, Phoenix, Lakers, Utah, and San Antonio. This is easily, I think, the Pelicans group, the toughest group in the entire NBA Cup tournament here. But I don't know. There's some about, I talked about this on Locked On NBA yesterday, actually. I'm a big believer in the play-in tournament, in the in-season cup, because it just gives you something else to root for. Right now, I don't see the Pelicans as title contenders this season. I think the West is open. They can maybe make a run, but I wouldn't call them true title contenders. I don't really know if anyone would. But you can win the NBA Cup. You can win the in-season tournament, and it would be fun. We would have a celebratory show here on Locked On Pelicans if they won that. Instead, we had an angry cast after getting blown out by the Lakers in Vegas. But it's fun to just root for things. And if you can't really root to win realistically an NBA title, rooting for something you can win is great. The Lakers hung a banner. Now, maybe the NBA told them they needed to do that. They did a champagne celebration in the locker room that was probably the NBA being like, you're going to do this no matter what, forcing this to be a cool thing. But I like that. Let these guys play for something. They wanted that. You heard the players on the Pelicans be like, no, we want to win this, right? It matters to NBA players. And if it matters to NBA players, this makes 4 games during the regular season that might not be great, that might be boring for this team because players are being rested in the midst of a long season. You're not going to rest guys for this. You kind of get the best out of both teams, and anything that makes, I don't want to say the NBA regular season more relevant. I find it somewhat relevant, but not exceptionally, right? But anything that makes the games more competitive, entertaining, so you're not going to the Smoothie King Center on a Tuesday night to watch a team that's resting a couple of people. That's boring, right? Now, we want the Pelicans to get the win, so we'll take that. But if you're just kind of coming to watch an entertaining game and to get the entertainment value factor from it, the NBA Cup kind of accomplishes that, right? The courts are wild looking. I love how garish some of them are. It's just different. It makes it feel different. It gives just it a little bit of a jolt of energy that it doesn't have otherwise. And in the middle of November, when we're still early in the season and who knows what to make of what, I don't hate that sort of thing. So I'm a big believer in the NBA Cup. I don't know. Maybe the advertising, the marketing for the NBA is working on me. I'm the type of guy that sees like food on commercials and I'm like, that looks delicious. I should order that. So maybe it's just me and I'm susceptible to that sort of thing. I should probably check my bank account and make sure I haven't done things like that recently. So maybe it just gets me with that, but I don't know. I like the gimmickiness of it. I like things that just make this fun, exciting, different. And I like the NBA Cup. I love the play-in tournament. Stressful being in it every single year. But I do really like the NBA play-in tournament and think that has been a great thing for the league in terms of just everything that it's done. I'm like already on board with the NBA Cup. Let me know if you are as well. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Are you just confused by it? That's always an option. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans, barring any sort of breaking news. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I will be back with y'all on Monday or Tuesday next week. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.